I had an extremely terrible Christmastime incident a few years ago. I'm a married mother of two. I have both a daughter and a boy. My daughter was still young enough to hold on to her belief of Santa Claus, but my son had already outgrown his belief in Santa Claus. In fact, she eagerly anticipated going to the mall so she could make her Christmas wish list come true. She was beaming with happiness as we made our yearly trip to the mall. Of course, my son would not be participating in the sitting on his lap, and he would probably spend the majority of his time in the arcade or the video game shop. However, the smile on my daughter's face was more radiant than the star on the tree. The mall had such a lengthy line. Since it was the weekend before Christmas, that seemed reasonable. Therefore, the wait time was going to be rather long. But it didn't matter. For the whole time we waited, she was beaming with joy. My daughter initially appeared to be fine when she eventually got to sit on his lap. But after a few seconds, her expression shifted. She started to appear very anxious. She then started to flinch. My daughter went over to me and buried her face on my leg for the first time ever after jumping off of his lap. I was shocked, but I guess I just assumed that any number of things may have alarmed her. She stayed as near to me as she could for the remainder of our time in the mall. She insisted that I keep holding her hand the whole time. I started to wonder if perhaps she was just a little bit alarmed by how crowded the mall was. After finishing our last minute of Christmas shopping, I grabbed the kids and we left for home. Nothing improved on the drive home. My daughter insisted on taking the front seat, which her brother found incredibly annoying, but I still let her do it. The entire way home, she merely appeared irritated. At home, everything was exactly as it had been. I had to ask my kid what was bothering her because she seemed distressed. She would just shake her head in answer, indicating that she was not going to inform me. Furthermore, I was unable to even begin to comprehend what was wrong with her. She appeared very anxious and frightened. She would not even lie in front of the Christmas tree to admire the lights, despite the fact that this was one of her favorite times of the year. Up until Christmas Eve, it persisted. So that they may wake up early in the morning, I wanted to put the kids to bed now. My daughter started to freak out, but my son had no problem with it. She made an effort to resist falling to sleep. She honestly said she didn't want him to come when I told her to get some rest or Santa Claus wouldn't be coming. She urged me to take all possible measures to stop him from coming. Of course, I was very perplexed. She once more shook her head when I inquired what was wrong. I tried to convince her that the best way for me to be able to protect her would be for her to tell me what she was afraid of. My daughter finally explained why she had been so sad. She began to explain to me that when she was sitting on Santa's lap, he whispered into her ear, "If you've been even the slightest bit bad this year, I'll be coming to kill you on Christmas Eve when you go to sleep." My kid was angry because she was aware that she hadn't always done the right thing. Naturally, I was upset, but that evening there was nothing I could do to stop the mall claws. Instead, I explained to my daughter that the man wasn't the real Santa and that he would never harm her under any circumstances. She didn't believe it. So I inquired as to whether she had ever been mischievous before. She acknowledged doing so. I also assured her that Santa had not harmed her in previous years, so why would he do so now? It's amazing how well that actually worked. I remained in the room with her until she fell asleep. She was ultimately all right in the morning, and we had a wonderful holiday. I did inform them all about the mall's Santa, but they were unable to take any action because they had no supporting documentation beyond our word. Number 2. My aunt's home on the North Dakota Reserve was where it was Christmas time in 1995 or 1996. The children were playing in their rooms, while some members of my family were watching television in the living room. I was assembling a puzzle while seated next to the table with my uncle and aunt. On this particular night, my cousin, who worked at the casino, pulled up and started going towards the house at around midnight. She noticed me seated at the table when she peered out the window. Someone was standing to my left, and another person was standing in the corner, while my uncle was seated opposite from me. She entered and sat by herself before putting her belongings away and joining us at the table as we were already chatting. She asked who was that in the corner and who had been seated next to me a few minutes earlier. She just responded, "Yeah, there was clearly someone standing next to you," when I told her that nobody had been standing there. She said it appeared to be our mother toying with your hair. I used to always let my long hair fall down because I have long hair. She claimed that this person was touching my hair like a mother would to a child. It made me feel a little uneasy, being just 12 or 13 years old at the time. My cousin was frightened that she saw someone was watching me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle. We eventually concluded that she most likely saw her mother. In 1992, a week before Christmas, she died on her birthday. In my family, aunts and uncles are viewed in the same way as parents. It wasn't as terrifying until I considered that it might have been her. We were unable to identify the individual standing in the corner though, and every year, odd things happen around Christmas. But we just like to think that she is coming to see us. Number 3. In a modest house that was close to 90 years old, my parents and I resided. It happened in Parkersburg, a small West Virginian town, in 1996. From the time I was 7 years old until I was 19, we lived there. I had the impression that I wasn't living alone in the house ever since we first moved in. I had a strong sense that I was being observed while I lay in bed at night. All of this began around Christmas when I invited a friend to stay the night. During the night, the heater abruptly turned off on us. The temperature significantly dropped while we were watching TV in the living room. Out of nowhere, the Christmas tree started shaking erratically as we stood up from the couch to go and turn up the heat. She and I were both frightened as ornaments started to tumble off in all directions. We hurried upstairs and sat on my bed. When we looked out at the pitch-black hallway, my door was only partially open at the time. There was a tall, white, hazy apparition running down the hallway. My buddy confirmed that she had observed the identical thing as I had. She didn't stay over again after that night. The years went without any incident. I developed an illness and I regularly ended up in the hospital. Stranger things started happening to me at that point. I started to sense things that no one else seemed to be able to after twice coming dangerously close to death. I experienced the nagging feeling of being watched once more. This time, I disregarded it, and eventually my condition went into remission. When I was 18, I started going through experiences that were completely new to me. My grandfather's passing caused me to become obsessed with death, and I started going to cemeteries a lot. I saw a rise in activity around this time. It all began with voices. It seemed like a television had been turned on, and voices could be heard upstairs, or, more creepy, outside my room. When this would happen, my parents were always asleep, and since their room had a vent, I could hear them as they slept in the room next door. When I checked all the rooms after getting up, there was no TV on. There is nothing to explain the voices. As the voices began to appear every night, I began to feel more and more frightened. I then began to notice shadow creatures. They were all human in shape. One night, when I carried my cat out of my room, she started growling violently. She never does this. The shadow figures assumed strictly human shapes. Some are tall, some are small. The shadow figures gave me the willies. I used to spend my nights lying in bed, haunted by the worry that I was losing my mind because no one else was going through this. My parents took me to a psychiatrist after I told them about my experiences, but the psychiatrist was unable to identify any problems with me. Up to the last 6 months we were there, I kept seeing the shadow figures. I occasionally become irritated with what this was haunting me. I would switch off the light before leaving a room. Each time a switch is flipped on or off, a respectable click is heard. Every time I turned it off, the click would resound, and when I turned around, the light would be back on. I yelled, "Stop playing games with me. Could you please turn out the light?" And sure enough, the light abruptly went out in front of my eyes. When I left the house once, I turned off the light in my bedroom. "What did I tell you about leaving a light on?" my dad asked me when my folks got home. I responded, startled. I turned it off. Regarding that, he was silent. Sometimes things will get so awful that I'll have to sleep in my parents' bedroom like a kid. We finally relocated to a new home far from the previous one in August 2008. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened to me here, and the energy is much lighter. Maybe it was because I dabbled in the paranormal, tried to communicate with ghosts frequently, and visited cemeteries to try to spook them. Perhaps that was the root of all the activity in the house.